Hi sweet friends, welcome back to Mary's Nest. Today we're going to make a cornbread skillet recipe. That's a sweet buttermilk cornbread you're sure to love. It's easy to make because it mixes up in one bowl, then bakes in your cast iron skillet for a tender center with a crispy, crunchy crust. If you're new to my channel, welcome. And if you like learning how to cook from scratch, I hope you'll subscribe. And be sure to click on the little notification bell that'll let you know each time I upload a new video. Well, let's go over the ingredients. What I've got here is 1 1/4 cups of stone ground cornmeal. Now this is sprouted cornmeal. Those of you who know me know I like to use a lot of sprouted grains. Don't feel that you need to use sprouted cornmeal. You can just use regular stone ground cornmeal and that'll be fine. It'll bake up the same way. And then the other thing I've got here is 3/4 cup of sprouted spelt flour. And again, you know, I like, as I said, to use sprouted flour when I bake. And I'll link to the video where I show how to soak and sprout wheat berries and make your own sprouted flour. And it's the same whether you're using wheat berries or spelt berries or whatever whole grain berries that you're using. Now here I have 1 cup of sucanat. You may know it by the name Rapadura or simply dried cane juice. I think sometimes it'll say that on the bag as well. And I do have 1 cup here. This is a sweet cornbread. My husband likes it sweet, but you can certainly reduce the amount of sugar you use if you want. And if you don't have dried cane juice, don't worry. You can use other sugars that you like. You can use white sugar here. You could use a light brown sugar. You could use maple sugar. That's a little on the expensive side, but if it is something you have and you use, you can certainly use that as well. Then over here, I've got 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And I just wanted to mention that I'll write up all these ingredients and have all the directions on how to make this cornbread, and you can just check the description below, where I'll have a link to the recipe. And next, I've just got 2 large eggs here in my measuring cup, and we're going to whisk those up. And then to that, we're going to add 1.5 cups of buttermilk. Now again, don't worry if you don't have buttermilk on hand. You can just use 1.5 cups of milk that you add a little lemon juice to or a little bit of vinegar to, and let that sit on the counter and just thicken up a bit. It'll work like a charm. Something else I've done also, when I've not had buttermilk or milk in the house, I've just taken some plain yogurt and thinned it with a little bit of water to the consistency of buttermilk, and I've used that, and it actually works quite well. And then we're going to need a stick of butter, which I'm going to melt on the stove. And that's 1 stick or 8 ounces. And then finally, you'll need your cast iron skillet and 2 tablespoons of butter, which is 1/4 of a stick of butter, or 2 ounces. And we're going to put this into the preheated oven, which we're going to preheat at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. We're going to put this cast iron into that preheated oven, let the butter melt. We're going to swirl it around, and then we'll be adding our batter to this. And that's what's going to make a wonderful crispy, crunchy crust on the outside. Now don't worry if you don't have a cast iron skillet, although they are wonderful to cook in, and I highly recommend that you get one. They're very reasonable. And this is a 10-inch skillet, and this is well seasoned. It's a Lodge. I've had it probably over 20 years, and I seasoned this one myself. But today a lot of them come pre-seasoned, which is interesting. But in any event, if you don't have a cast iron skillet like this, you can use one of those square baking pans, about a 9 by 9, and that'll work well too. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put this on my stove and just let this start to melt. Well, all we need to do now is just add our flour into the cornmeal, and we're going to add our sugar right into the cornmeal. And then we're going to add our baking powder, our baking soda, and our salt. And that's that. And then I'm just going to take the whisk and just give everything a nice little mixture together so that it's all well incorporated before we add the wet ingredients. Well, as we get ready to prepare the wet ingredients and add them to the dry ingredients, I'll bring you in closer so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Now what I'm going to do is just break up these yolks and give these a nice little whisk. Get them a little bit on the frothy side. And I love this. I don't know if you have one of these or have seen one. This is a magic whisk. They are just fantastic. I had seen years ago Nigella Lawson using one in one of her cooking shows, and I was so intrigued by it. and I ordered one, and you know, as I said, they're very reasonable. I'll put a link below in the description if you want to look at them. But they're so clever, and they do a great job, especially on eggs, which I find other whisks a little, I don't know, I just find that other whisks don't work as well when it comes to beating up eggs. I normally will use a fork. I just find it easier. Well, I'm just going to keep beating these a little bit until they get a little frothier, and then we'll add the buttermilk. Well, I've got my eggs nice and frothy the way that I wanted them. It was just less than 30 seconds of beating with this little whisk, this little magic whisk. And then I'm going to add now the buttermilk right into the eggs. 1, 2, 3, perfect. And just give that a little stir to incorporate everything. And then we'll get ready to add this to the dry ingredients. Now, before we add the wet ingredients to the dry ingredients, I just wanted to mention something about the spelt flour that I used. As I mentioned, it was sprouted spelt flour. And as I said, you don't need to use that. But I don't think I mentioned some alternatives for you. You can use just regular spelt flour, or you can use whole wheat flour, any whole grain flour that you want, or you can also use all-purpose flour. Each will come out with a slightly different texture, but all will be crispy and crunchy on the outside if you bake it in a cast iron skillet. Well, I've got my melted butter also, so we're set with that. And I've got my wet ingredients, my dry ingredients, and my oven just came up to temp. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my cast iron skillet with the 2 tablespoons of butter into my oven, let that melt and start to heat up, and then we'll mix all this up. Then this will be ready. We'll pour the batter in, and we'll have cornbread in no time. Now I've made a well in my dry ingredients, and I'm just going to go ahead and pour in my wet ingredients, which is simply the 2 eggs and the buttermilk. And now I've switched to my spatula here, or a spoonula. I forget what they call these. It's like a spatula, but it also has a little bit of a spoon effect to it. It's just wonderful for mixing these type of things. And all I'm going to do is just mix this. We don't want to overmix. You know, any quick breads, you never want to overmix, otherwise they can become tough and not have that nice, light, fluffy texture that's just delightful in any sort of quick bread. And that's kind of why I like using sprouted flour, because I find that when you use whole grain flours, baked goods can sometimes be a little dense, and I'm not a fan of the soaking method. I find that doesn't really create all that tender a baked good. So what I like to do is sprout my grain and then dry it and grind it myself. And I just find the sprouted flour does a lovely job. Alrighty, well, this looks like it's come along quite nicely. And now I'm going to add in my stick of melted butter. Just add that right in like that. And I'm just going to continue to incorporate that. And then we'll get ready to pour this into the cast iron skillet. Well, I've got my cast iron pan out of the oven, and I'm just swirling around that melted butter. Looks wonderful. And now we're just going to put the batter right in. There we go. Oh, beautiful. Well, I've got my batter all out of my bowl and into my cast iron pan, and now we're going to go and put this in our preheated 425-degree oven. Well, I just took this out of the oven, and it smells heavenly. I can't wait to take a slice. Well, first I want to mention that this took about 15 minutes in a 425-degree oven. And I've noticed that when I've made this different ways, because sometimes I've made it with all-purpose flour, sometimes I've made it with the sprouted spelt, sometimes I've made it with just whole wheat flour. And I find that if I use all-purpose flour, it can take about 12 minutes to bake up. And I find with the whole grains, it takes about 15 minutes. So I just wanted to let you know about that. Now, granted, everybody's oven is a little different and whatnot. I would recommend whatever flour you use, start to check it. Look in your oven maybe between 10 and 12 minutes. If it's browning a little too quickly, you can always put a little piece of aluminum foil on top until it's baked through. And then at about 12 minutes, check it with a toothpick. If the toothpick comes out clean and it's nice and browned on top, you're all set. If the toothpick comes out a little wet, then you know it's got to go a little longer. But this particular one took about 15 minutes. Well, I've let this cool for a few minutes. I should probably wait a little longer, but my husband and I are very anxious to give it a taste. So I'm going to go ahead and cut into it. Oh, it feels wonderful. So tender. Yet, if you can see, and I'll bring you in closer too so you can see this, the edges are delightfully crispy. That's what I love about doing this in a cast iron frying pan. Okay, and I'll just get this out and I'll put it on the plate and we'll give it a taste. Well, I wanted to bring you in a little closer so you could see the nice crispy crust all around the edge, and I just cut it. You always know how getting the first slice out is always the challenge. Well, it's still quite warm. I should wait until it cools a little, but I just wanted to show you it's just so tender inside, and yet this is nice and crispy. It's got a nice texture to it. Well, I'm ready to give it the taste test to see how it came out. Oh, it's just delightfully flaky. Oh, it's so good. I meant to say not flaky, tender. It's just got a wonderful tender crumb to it and a little bit of a crisp topping. Whoops, the fork. I want to taste this corner here just to see. I love the way it comes crispy and crunchy on the edges there from being in the cast iron pan. It's just delightful. This is really good, and it's got a great sweet flavor to it. All I need now is a glass of milk, a nice glass of raw milk for me. And you don't even really need to put any butter on this because we add so much butter in the front end. But you certainly can if you want. Be sure to check the description below where I'll put a link to the recipe. If you like this video, I hope that you'll give me a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you enjoy learning how to cook from scratch, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, that's all for today, but I want to thank you for joining me, and I look forward to having you join me again right here in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless. Oh, before you go, be sure to check out these videos. I think you'll like them too. And don't forget, subscribe to my channel, click on the little notification bell below, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.